Hello guys, Nigel here from Nigel's Modelling Bench again. This is a Hellcat video, but it's not a Hellcat video with a part number. It's not part 8 or part 12 or part 16 or anything. It's just, I just want to talk about the plastic finish and the glossy blue. Now, if you go back to my earlier parts of my US Navy Hellcat build, you'll see that when I sprayed the glossy blue in the wheelbase and stuff, the plastic has got a very grainy finish on it. It's very, you can hear it's very rough. It is on the inside. It's a very rough finish, and when you spray the glossy blue on there, it just sort of makes it jump out. It's really bad, and I think you can kind of see it on the Airfix build sample on the side of the box as well. So if you are building a glossy blue version, we need to look at getting this finish better. So I'm just going to do some little experiments with this is a spare wing I've got, because as you know I've got two kits. So what I've done here, I've left, this is all bare plastic here, so we'll see how the paint looks on that. This is been sprayed, this area has been sprayed with 1200, Mr. Surfacer 1200, thinned. I'm not going to say what ratio. I thin it to the consistency of milk. As you all know, I've done a whole video on Mr. Surfacer. Mr. Surfacer thickens over time. So if I tell you guys to thin it 60% thinners to 40% paint, when it's brand new, that'll probably be too thin. When it's 6 months old, it will probably be too thick. So yeah, it's best to just do it so it's about the consistency of milk. It's only a primer anyway. So I've sprayed over there 1200, and then on this side I've polished it back. I've started off with this flory sanding stick and used the smooth side, and then gone again with this flory stick, which is, it looks terrible just because it's got black impregnated in it, but it's fairly new really, and just polish it to get a bit of a sheen. And you can see that most of the primer has been removed, and it's kind of left a sort of a shinier sheen on the raised areas of this canned finish, which might look quite effective, I don't know. So what I've done here, I've also then polished it, and then I've washed it and gone over an electric toothbrush, just to make sure there's no residue left down in the rivet holes, because the whole purpose of doing this is to get a good finish but not lose any of the rivet detail. So that's why I'm putting this video together, to see what sort of results we can get, and then you can do the same. So I'm going to give this now another coat. I'm going to go right to the edges this time rather than just across the middle, and I'm going to give it another coat of the 1200 thin down, and then I'm going to leave it for a few hours to dry, and then rub that back and polish it back and see what kind of finish we can start to get with the actual primer. And then I'm going to look at putting some blue paint on, and I'll probably just put the blue paint halfway up in case we need to start, improving things. Okay, so what I've got here now is the wing. Obviously I've got some Merca 2000 grit wet and dry, so that's it's a brand new sheet, so it's sort of coarse-ish. And then I've got a bottle of water here. These old Badger airbrush bottle dispensers are quite handy, because if you put your finger over the end and then lift it up, it dispenses water. So I could just put some water on the wing here, and then in fact I'm going to put loads on. There we go. And then I'm just going to gently rub the whole area with the wet and dry, making sure I get all around all the corners and everything. And for those of you that think this Airfix canning effect is too rough, too pronounced, then here you go, you can rub away and get rid of it. So straight away I can feel that's pretty smooth. I'm being careful here because we've got some raised detail around this ID light. I take it that's what that is, identification light. And then I'm also going to do the same on the bare plastic. Also got a raised detail here, so being careful around any raised detail. I'll pick up some more water. So yeah, you can see how long I'm doing this for now. I'm going to rub along the leading, perpendicular to the leading edge because that's the way the canning goes. You can see here where we've got the rubbed off paint, you can see that the canning on the leading edge is stepped up and down. And as I say, some people say it's too pronounced. I don't think it is, not really. And now we can find out if it's worth doing that pre-polishing or not. Alright, so I'll dry this off now. I'll go and wash it off, make sure I've got no residue left in the rivet holes, because when you paint it, that'll sort of make the rivet holes disappear. You can see there's all residue in these here. So I'll go and do that now, and then I'll come back. It'll be a few seconds for you, it'll probably be a day or two for me. Okay, here we go then. Right, so this is about 24 hours later, and as you can see I've put some blue on. Now what I've actually done here, I've gone over again because I still had this, there was no real difference between this and this. Very difficult to show on the camera, so I thought I'd go on and just rub this down with the 2000 grit again, wet, and just remove the mottled effect. And as you can see, it's kind of taken away the graininess of the plastic, so we've got this flat finish now. You can still see some graininess around that light detail because it's very difficult to get in there. And you can see there where I've gone through to the primer, you can see the graininess of the plastic underneath. And here, this area here is the one that's just had the one coat of Mr. Surfacer, and you can see we've still got the graininess there. And then this is the side, this is just neat plastic here, between this line of rivets and where I've rubbed here. That's just a neat plastic rub down. So you can see it's, you know, it's a very, very grainy finish. So I've done here on this side of it, I've actually gone over it and polished that as well. But as you can see, the paint is kind of, I don't know, it hasn't peeled, but it looks like it may have lifted slightly. So when we spray this again, which I'm going to do now, and I'm going to show you it wet, then we'll see what happens. I'm going to go up a little bit further this time, and then you'll see exactly what I was talking about. So we can see, I'm beginning to wonder if the chemicals in the paint are actually eating into the coat below, which has given us this graininess, hence the no difference between these two. So let me go and get these painted and I'll come back. The other thing, you know, this wing that I used on my Mr. Surfacer video, this hasn't been sanded at all. Yes, it has on that end. What I'll do is on this end, this hasn't been sanded at all. I'll just give this some blue paint so you can see just how bad it will look if you do nothing. And there we go, painted. So I think we can see that basically what's happened is we've got a nice gloss coat. Now what this is, I've tried something a bit different. This is a coat of glossy blue mixed with leveling thinners, about 50-50, and then just to finish off I went about 80-20 thinners to paint and just went over it wet, and it kind of seemed to pull everything down. But as we can see, it's still wet, I daren't touch it. But we've now got the shine that we want in this area here where it's all been polished and polished and polished. This area here where it didn't get the two lots of Mr. Surfacer, you can see it's still a little bit grainy. Okay, probably acceptable. And then this area here is just the polished plastic. But if you remember when I showed you just now, there was an area of paint I thought I'd ripped out. You can see that it actually did tear and it's left a mark. So we do need a primer. The Mr. Colour glossy blue isn't bonding very well to the plastic, although saying that, I didn't wash these parts, but then they have been rubbed down and toothbrushed and polished afterwards, so it should have bonded better than that. We can see on the end here we've got a nice shine there, no problem there. But my feeling is with this paint, ignore the dust, I should have cleaned it all off first. My feeling is with this paint, as it dries it pulls down, but now we can see when we look along this panel in the light, if I can catch it, we can see the canning effect that Airfix have got, and I don't think that's over the top at all really. Mind you, saying that has been polished and polished and polished. So now if we look at this wing here, this is bare, completely untreated plastic, and you can see this is what I'm trying to avoid. Now this has had the same 50-50, couple of coats, and then one wet coat of the 80-20. So you can see the difference in not polishing, not priming or anything. So that's your Airfix plastic there, and this here, this area here is just the 80-20, and you can see there it's very, very grainy. It's also got lots of bits in it. Never mind. So there we go, guys. Let's let that go off. I'm going to give that 12-24 hours, see what it looks like, and then I'll come back. Right then, guys, I said I'd come back in about 24-48 hours. This is actually about 4 days, and as we can see here, it's pulled back in. You can see now the all high gloss is gone. We've got the graininess back, and unfortunately it's not looking very good at all. And you can see here on the plastic that's polished, it's we got that tear mark. There's a couple of bits of dust in it as well, which I'm not particularly worried about. I wasn't taking care not to have dust. And you can see on this one here, the plastic is really showing through. It's such a shame that this plastic is so grainy, but I'm also beginning to wonder if the Mr. Colour is actually eating into the Mr. Surfacer primer and sort of pulling in, because it's a bit like a 2-pack paint will dry on the outside and form a skin and then dry. This stuff is acting more like a cellulose, where it just pulls down and pulls down and pulls down. So whatever's underneath it, the tiniest of scratches, the tiniest of marks will show through, whereas with a 2K it tends to not show through. That's why you always get an amazing shine with 2K, because it has that, it just dries like a resin on the outside and then pulls in. So what I've done now, I have sprayed this with this is MIG one-shot primer, which is basically Stynol Res apparently. I've used a tiny little bit on a couple of bits and pieces, and I must say I quite like it, although I have been led to believe that as it gets older it gets thicker and doesn't like to spray. And also this top that they've put on is absolute garbage. You can see in here that you get these lumps of hardened paint. You can see it, and it's just awful. The last time I used it, well, just now before I sprayed this, I had little chunks come out, and so I would suggest just remove the lid and use just pour it into your airbrush or whatever. Don't use that stupid lid. Yeah, another gimmick. It's a bit like those Viejo metal colour lids that when you shake them and then you open it, it just goes everywhere. So there we go, and that was the chair squeaking, not me. So I'm going to let this dry now for 24 hours, and I'm going to give it a rub back with some 2000 wet, give it a toothbrush and wash, and then I'll spray it with the blue again and see what happens. But this video has now been about 2 weeks in the making, so you know it's a very, very long process, but it's worth it to see what we can achieve. I mean, I think that finish is kind of alright, but I don't know, I still don't like that graininess. Maybe I'm going to try a gloss coat on it. Right, here we are. This is more than 2 months later now, and I've had another go at these wings. Now, if you remember, the last thing I did on here was gave it a gloss coat. I used some aqua gloss. Sorry, no, that was the last video. I said I was going to do that. In the meantime, I've painted this with aqua gloss and then tried to polish it back, and it didn't polish very well. So I've tried to paint over it again with the Mr. Colour blue to see what happens, and as you can see, we've got a very, very wrinkled finish. Now, this is very interesting because obviously it's not suitable for your model, but you can see the wrinkled finish there. If ever you wanted to achieve that, that is done by spraying Mr. Colour lacquer paint over aqua gloss. So if you ever wanted to get that finish, like say you wanted to depict some really old wrinkled up leather on an old seat or something like that, that's probably the way to do it. And you can see here the areas where I've rubbed through the aqua gloss, the paint has gone down fine. It's still a little bit grainy, but you know, it's obviously this is not suitable, it needs to be stripped and anything, but this is just a scrap wing anyway, so we're not going to worry about that. The success story comes here. Now, if you remember, this was painted with, this was just straight on the plastic, and it's no good at all. But if we look at this one here, we can see that the the finish on here is gorgeous. Now you can see some scratch marks where I've used 1200 to polish it, so now I know that I need to use something finer. But we can see that the finish on there is lovely. That's exactly what we're looking for, and it's not too glossy, it's not at all matte, all the graininess is gone, and that is basically using this MIG one-shot primer and then the Guns paint over the top. What I'm going to do now on camera, just to see how it works, I'll wet it, and I've got an Infinity polishing sponge here. This is a 4000 grit, and I'm just going to see if I can get more gloss out of it. So if you wanted to build a new aircraft that was more shiny, just want to see if you could actually get that effect. As you can see, it is getting more and more shiny. So there we go. If you want to get the lovely gloss finish that we're after, as I say, ignore those scratch marks. That's where I've used 2 course of paper on the primer. So yeah, basically put your primer down, stay with sort of 2.5, 4000 grit, whatever, or 3000, and then afterwards you can polish with this if you want to get a shine. But what I did like about that, if you go back a few seconds and what I just showed you, it pulled down, we've lost all the graininess, and it gave it that lovely sort of satiny, you know, off gloss finish, which is exactly how they would have been after a few days service, in my opinion. So there we go. So there is our success story. So the secret is to polish the plastic, rub it down, you know, get rid of most of the graininess, give it a good coat of this. Now this was obviously left for something like 2 months, so you know, perhaps leave it a couple of weeks, let it really dry out, just give it a rub down, and then I've basically sprayed over it with the Guns C365, is it the gloss blue colour, and then mixed with self-leveling thinners, mixed about 60% thinners, 40% paint, sprayed it on there. I've left it, I don't know, 36 hours to dry, and there we go. That's the finish we get. So that's exactly what we're after. Thanks for watching. It's been a long video. I mean, maybe not very long in minutes wise, but I've been on this, as I say, over 2 months, and there we go. That's the finish we're after. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like, and if you haven't already, hit the subscribe. If you want to support me, I've given a link to the PayPal at the below this video, and if you have already subscribed, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to going to 6,000 now, so I'll see you all soon. Bye for now.